I do want to emphasize that part of this research has been supported by one of the research grants that Metroparks has been doing the past few years, so we're really grateful for that. It really allowed us to like kickstart this project. And yeah, without further ado, I'm gonna pass it on to Ella and Trevor. And yeah, thank you for being here.
Hi, I'm Ella Divish. I'm from the University of Dayton. As she said, I'm a senior there.
And I'm Trevor, and I'm a junior at the University of Dayton. So here's a brief outline of what we'll be discussing today. So first, we're just going to give a run through of our introduction and the background to our research, sort of our motivations for wanting to do what we did, and then go into our predictions, and then give a detailed explanation of our methodology, and then we're going to end with a discussion of our results for this project.
So we're going to get into the background. So as you know, Dayton, Ohio is home to a lot of different recreational trails that provide activity for humans as well as habitats for wildlife. Through this, we found that a lot of the species that were most common that we decided to focus on were the white-tailed deer, the squirrels. However, we could not differentiate specific species of squirrels, so we grouped them all together as squirrel. The northern raccoon, opossum, and coyotes. This was just for wildlife species. We didn't include any humans or horses or house cats, and we also chose not to include any birds. With this, these use of trails through activities by humans and around these protected areas do have an impact on the mammal activity and the occurrence. So it's just how often we see these and what they're kind of doing in those areas. And these are also throughout the slides, you'll see pictures that we captured through our trail cams. These wildlife are important because they provide a lot of ecosystem services. This can be through seed dispersal, prey control, or nutrient cycling that help to keep the habitat's quality good for everything. But we do see that they are known to avoid suitable habitats and have an increase in their flight response in the presence of humans, so just not inhibiting areas that have a lot of human activity. And with different reviews that we found while doing this research, we found that they do have an increase in their flight response, and with the presence of humans can increase their nocturnality. So they tend to be more active during the day, even if they are a diurnal species, which diurnal is just being active during the day. Nocturnal is being active during the night.
So a large facet of this project was looking at how the surrounding land use affected wildlife occupancy and activity. And so a lot of our Metroparks are surrounded by human-modified landscapes, and this comes in several forms like roads, human buildings, just different infrastructure like that, agricultural fields. When you look around, there's some sort of human activity happening all around our forests and natural areas. And mammals tend to respond to this human presence in a variety of ways, depending on the species. So some may take advantage of those resources and exploit that human activity. I think we're all pretty familiar with raccoons, digging in trash and things like that. So when I say exploit those resources, kind of imagine that. So some species might tend to like those areas. But on the other hand, others may shy away or tend to avoid that human activity. And coyotes are one species that was of particular concern to us, and was something that intrigued us and that we wanted to look into specifically for that reason. So with regard to land transformation and coyotes, as a little background, coyotes are one of Ohio's primary generalist predators, one of the top animals on the food chain that we have in the state, and they have a large land use requirement as opposed to a lot of other species. So what this means is that they require a lot of land to obtain the resources. They're usually traveling long distances to meet their basic needs. So with that said, habitat connectivity is a big deal. So having areas that allow them to go from one natural area to the next via corridors, that's a big deal for this species in particular. And past studies have even shown that urban coyotes maybe have twice the travel distance of that of a coyote in a natural area, simply just to meet those basic needs and obtain food. Also, the literature that we reviewed showed that coyotes tended to be negatively affected by close proximity to like human buildings and recreation and that sort of thing. So it was definitely a species that we wanted to look into further. So we had 3 primary study objectives for this. So we had temporal activity, so just looking at the time that wildlife are active throughout the parks. So that was one direction we wanted to take. Also, species richness was another, so looking at the number of species in a given area. And then for spatial distribution, that was where the coyotes came in. We only did a spatial study on the coyotes specifically, so just looking at where they are in the park in relation to other landscape features. So.
And knowing all of that, we wanted to really think about what we thought would come from this study and what we were hoping to come out from it. So for a prediction through the temporal idea was that we feel that areas with less human influence will have temporal activity that displays more of what you would see and expect in the wild without the human influence around them. And then with species richness, the amount of species in an area, we feel it will be highest in the areas with less human influence, while there will be less species found in the areas where there are more human influences.
And then for the spatial, for the coyotes, we predicted that areas closer to roads or human buildings and forest edge would have fewer coyotes than areas that were more inland or more centered in the park.
So now we're gonna go through what we did and how we got to this point. First, the 3 Metroparks that we decided to focus on were Upper Twin Creek, or Upper Twin. That's a location that doesn't have any hiking trails and is usually through a permit to be allowed to be there. Then there is Germantown with a medium to intermediate amount of hiking trails and human activity, and Twin Creek with the highest amount of hiking trails in the area. And just for you to get a better understanding of where these are, this is the outline of each of the locations. And from now on, most of the time, we will refer to Upper Twin as none, Germantown is medium, and Twin Creek is high. The lines here are just the trails that are active and there. And then as you can see here, we're at Cox Arboretum, and there are the 3 locations of the parks that we have.
And then our method for obtaining wildlife activity and monitoring different species and getting that activity data, we use camera traps. You may have heard this referred to as trail cameras. They got a lot of different names, but Ella has one right now actually. We had several of these that we deployed. Essentially, there's an SD card that goes into it, so as something walks across the field of view, they're motion censored, so it'll take pictures of whatever comes in front of it, so it's a great way to get non-invasive data of wildlife. So in the fall of 2023, we deployed 23 cameras, and those were out from August to November. We had 4 at our no trail site, and 11 at our medium trail site, and 8 at our high trail site. And we tried to choose the sites, the specific locations for cameras pretty arbitrarily, trying to get a nice even spread and that sort of thing. They were all 50 meters from trails. We didn't want to get a lot of human activity captured on them. So we weren't wanting to get humans walking down the trails and that kind of thing. And we also set the cameras to take 3 pictures per burst. So every time something walked across, we get 3 pictures to ensure that we got a nice picture, at least one of whatever was there. So this picture here is of Ella and I deploying one. Our method for doing that was we would put them in a metal protective case, so they didn't get damaged since they were out for 6 or 8 weeks. And you can see us there. We're tying it to the tree. We have a rod that goes around it with a lock and key mechanism to deter theft. And we would always put a tag with our lab name on it, contact information as well.
So just to analyze all the results that we got and what we wanted to do with it, for our temporal analysis, They were graphs created to understand the pattern of the activity of the 3 species that I felt were the most abundant, the deer, the raccoon, and the squirrel. So they were grouped together for each of the parks and compared to each other at each of the parks. And then for the species richness map, this was to quantify the species richness in each of the areas. So this map was created for camera sites. So each of the camera sites has its own point, and then the trail density and the location, just to see how close the trails, or not how close the trails are, but if the trails have an impact on not the amount of detections, but the amount of species at a location.
And then for the spatial analysis, again, this was only for the coyotes. So once we had the data recorded for all the species and we went back in the lab and organized that, I went through and compiled all of the coyote detections separately by week for each camera, and then measured 3 different human landscape variables that I wanted to test, those being distance to nearest roadway from the camera, distance to nearest building, and then distance to forest edge. So those are the 3 main human landscape variables that I looked at. And then after doing those 2 things, the data was analyzed to see if there was any influence of these landscape variables on the coyote presence in the park.
So now let's get into what we found and how they look.
So here is a pie chart of our findings for the entire study. We had just over 5,000 total wildlife detections throughout our study time. As you can see, about 1/3 of our detections were squirrels, 1/3 were raccoons, and 1/3 were deer. So those made up a majority of what we were seeing in the parks. But we also had mouse, we had possum, rabbit, coyote, of course, and we actually had 1 detection of bobcat at Germantown Metroparks. But this was the general trend that we had across all the sites across the study.
So to go into that a little deeper, at the high, medium, and no, you can see that it really does follow that same pattern of having the squirrel, deer, and raccoon of being the most abundant species in the locations, with an assortment of other species found throughout there in the camera traps. It's also really interesting to point out that Germantown, with the medium amount of trails, does have about almost or over double the amount of individual species or individual detections that were found compared to the high and the no trails. So that was just something that we felt was a really interesting observation and wanted to point out. So to get into the results a little bit more about the temporal activity, this chart shows all of the grouping of the deer. So each of the lines, the black is the high, the blue is the medium, and the red is the none. So you can see that these are a 24-hour period, and it groups all of them deer together to about compared to each of the locations. And at early morning in the hour, 8 a.m., you can see that there is a spike at all of the locations. So the deer are very active during the morning. It definitely drops, but it drops in all 3 of the parks during the day, and that would be when humans are most active. And then it spikes back up at all 3 of the locations again at night. So it follows a very similar pattern, and we didn't see much difference in the deer activity at any of the parks, regardless of the amount of trails that were there. For the squirrels, it's very similar that they follow the same pattern at each of the locations, that there is a spike at the beginning of the day. When the sun's out, it drops a little bit here on this one for the middle of the day, and then it goes back up at the end of the day. So again, all 3 of the locations did not seem to have much of an impact on how often we were seeing the squirrels and the abundance in the area. But for the raccoons, we did see a significant difference at the location of no trails. So the red line right here shows that during the day, they are a lot more active when there are no trails. So they seem to have their more nocturnal behaviors at the places with trails when there are humans present. They have the spike at the beginning and the spike at the end, where it doesn't have that big of a spike for the red line. which is definitely very interesting to see that the raccoons did alter their behavior when there are humans present and when there's recreational trails in the locations. For the species richness, so this was the amount of species, not the individual detections, this is a layout of each of the locations. As you can see, the none, medium, and high. Then each of the red dots correlates to a camera in the location, and the larger the dot was the more species that were found at it. And then the darker blue line is the presence of the trails, with the purple showing how dense the trails are, so how close they are to the trails and how many are around them. And to point out, I think it's also really interesting to see that right here you can see there's a lot that could be close to 10 species found on this particular camera, where right next to it, still in that dark purple, dense trail area, there's very few species found. So there wasn't a huge impact on the trails being there and the amount of species that were found.
So looking at the coyote occupancy results, this map here shows basically what our statistical analysis told us once we looked at all the data. So essentially 7 out of the 23 camera traps that we had out throughout the study had confirmed occupancy, coyote occupancy. So 7 cameras definitely detected coyotes based on the footage that we looked through, and those are denoted by the green circles. So every circle is a camera, and some are a little hard to see. There's one detection up in Upper Twin. Also, it may be a little hard without the borders here, but Upper Twin is the park up at the property on the very top, and then Germantown Metropark is in the middle there with that cluster, and then down below is Twin Creek Metropark. So we had coyotes at all 3 locations, and also what the statistical analysis determined was that there were 5 additional sites that had probable but unconfirmed coyote occupancy, and that was determined based on how similar those other 5 sites were in their surrounding land use to the sites that had definite detections. So basically what those yellow dots are signifying is that those probably do have coyotes occupying those areas because the program figured that the landscape around was similar, closely resembled that of those sites where we had definite detections. And overall, it was statistically significant that coyotes did distance themselves from roads and buildings, and they were farther away from the forest edge as well. And this graph, it may be a little hard to see, I apologize, but this was a geospatial analysis that was done this past fall, and this is looking at the roads specifically, so this is not taking into account any of the other variables. So the roads around these parks are denoted by the road type. All the numbers are just different road classes, but either way, they're all roads there in the colored lines. And the color, the sort of the green-red gradient there is what the program used to sort of signify, based on the pixel, the distance from that location to from the road to the camera. So for example, the green would be really close to a road, and then as you move inward into a park, you would get warmer, get to the red color. So the dots are all of our camera sites again. This time with the detections, we had 0 detections at all the red ones, and then all the green dots had wildlife. They all had coyote detections. Increasing size means that they had more detections. So for example, the big dot there in Germantown, right here in the middle, that had like 4 detections, whereas that one up in Upper Twin maybe only had 1 or 2 detections on that camera. And from from the geospatial analysis, we were able to extrapolate those distances and associate the distance value from each pixel to the camera, to every camera. And so from that, we were able to come up with a mean distance from road, which is on the y-axis of this graph, and then on the x-axis is coyote detections. And so what we see here is that in general, the sites where we had more detections, those were typically farther away from roads. There was an exception with sites that had 0, but in general, we have a positive relationship between coyote detections and occupancy with increasing distance from roads.
So let's talk about what that really means in a little different way. So, apologize for that, don't know why it shifted, but that's okay. We're gonna go through our predictions that we mentioned earlier. So through the temporal prediction, we felt that there would be more activity and with less human influence, and it would be more expected of what you would see in the wild. This was partially supported through the raccoons because I actually learned this today. They're not fully nocturnal. They just act nocturnal in the presence of humans, which I thought was really interesting. We learned something new every day. So this was partially supported that they were more active when there were no humans around. However, the deer and the squirrel didn't care. They were the same active. They really didn't make a difference to them. And then for the species richness, for that prediction, I predicted that there will be the highest in areas with less human influence and decrease as human influence increases. And that was not supported at all. Each of the locations had a very similar amount of species found. I know that earlier I said that there was a detection difference for Germantown, but there wasn't a species difference. It was all around 9 to 8 found at each location.
And then for the spatial results for the coyotes, that prediction was supported. So through the analyses, coyotes did tend to occupy areas farther away from those human modified areas such as roads or forest edge or human buildings.
So, like I said earlier, the squirrels and deers did not alter their behavior based on the human. However, the raccoons really did have a greater daytime activity and were active a lot more when there was no trails. So, and there were increased nocturnality in the trails. They were a lot more active during those peaks. We feel like this could be because raccoons may have a negative experience and influence from humans. They're seen as like a nuisance predator. So we were talking about earlier, you see them in trash cans or in your front yards or messing around, and they're definitely shooed off and chased away. It's not a species that you'd want around you. So that could have an impact on why they're not active during the day in our parks. Where the deer and squirrel are often just seen at a distance. You kind of point at them, sometimes you get a picture, but you're not really chasing after them. I know that there's squirrels everywhere on campus, and they don't really care what's going on. They're digging in the trash or eating natural things. So species richness was not greater with no trails.
And then for the spatial, for the coyotes, again, they distance themselves from human structures and human activity. And we think this is largely due to the tendency for coyotes to get sort of a bad rap or have a negative perception by the public. And I think we've all heard the stories of coyotes in neighborhoods getting pets or bringing around children, and that's just something that's always feared. So possibly just negative interactions with humans previously are keeping the coyotes from wanting to go to those areas or wanting to stay away from roads or stay away from buildings due to sort of that possible negative interaction to humans that they have been exposed to before. And for our next steps, so we are continuing this project, so we're in the process now of sorting and analyzing data that we collected in the fall of 2024. So last fall we went out and we did 10 additional camera traps throughout these 3 parks, which we're going to add to the original 23 and hopefully get a nice data set and sort of expand on that, looking at many of the same variables because we do see some trends that we want to look at even further as we go forward. This time they were all 100 meters from trails. We sort of made that difference. We want to kind of see also with ongoing research, maybe if if trail distance from those trails specifically are impacting the sort of the things that we were looking into throughout this study. And also, Ella and I will be presenting our research at the University of Dayton's Standard Symposium in April. Standard is a symposium that the university puts on where undergraduate labs can go in and talk about what they've done and share the research with other students and the public. So we will be disseminating there in about a month. And I will be working on this project, continuing it for another year as part of my honors thesis for my degree. So we'll be working on this until next spring, just looking at wildlife diversity in particular, and then more species richness analysis as well.
So we hope that this data kind of helped to give you an understanding of how humans can influence wildlife and trails and in what ways they do influence. And then we wanted to say that your actions do matter. There's so many ways that you as the public can help to create a better space and a clean space for all of us. So again, clean up any trash that's on the trail. Doesn't matter if it's yours, it's always great to pick up and look after everyone around you. Stay on those marked paths. That's definitely important, as you were saying, like we're gonna see if 50 or 100 meters have more of a difference. So if you stay on your paths, that helps everyone out. Keep your pets on leashes. I know that's rules in a lot of different parks, but can't hurt to hear it again. And then drive carefully around these areas. You never know what could run out in front of you, and you gotta keep the populations happy. Then you can report any nature sightings that you find, anything interesting or anything beneficial. You could probably, there's always nature centers at the parks that you can report this to. There's emails on the Metroparks websites. And also there's a thing called citizen science, which is where the citizens can take pictures that can then be verified by scientists through this, that just help with different research practices. There's apps like iNaturalist, which are really easy to use. You just take a picture or do a recording of something that could be beneficial or something that you don't see often. And then if you see anyone's research equipment, there's flagging tape or poles or camera traps, please don't disturb them. They're there for a reason, and if you feel like something is a little iffy, you can always ask a park ranger or ask the front desk and they can give you better information if that's allowed to be there or not. And as always, continue to visit these parks. They're a great resource that we all have here. They're beautiful, and continue to come to programs like this to educate yourself more about them.
And then lastly, we just want to give a big thank you to Lisa Hill with Five Rivers Metroparks for kind of helping us out with the properties and coordinating and that sort of thing. And then also Five Rivers Metroparks in general for letting us research on these properties. It's been a big help. And then also Dr. Ganshoff for her mentorship and support with all the analysis and everything in the lab. That's been a big help. And then lastly, the University of Dayton for the resources and the ability to go out and do this. So.
Yeah, so thank you. And if you have any questions, we're more than happy to answer them. This is also our confirmed site, or our verified sighting of the bobcat in Germantown.
Not the greatest photo, but I promise you it's
When you talk about more sightings in Germantown, is that normalized in the number of camera traps you have out at all?
No, it is not.
No,
Yeah.
I didn't think about that, but no, it does not.
And a simple question, how did you determine how many cameras you put in each park?
It was really random the way that we did it. So we did it on like an online Onyx and just kind of felt like where the best locations would be. And then when we were able to go out, a research class held by Dr. Ganshoff also went out and put 10 cameras up. So that was more about how close they could get to the areas through a class period.
So it was a combination. Sorry, what was the question? What am I looking to?
Why-
Oh, sorry. So it was a combination of things. As this was first, I initially just put like random points, and then you get as close as you can to that point. But of course, that's not always possible, right? So and also we wanted to standardize it, so it was always 50 meters from the trail, so we didn't have that distance to worry about because that's something I want to look at later. So, and then the amount of cameras was based on size. So Germantown had 11 cameras, Upper Twin, which was the site with no trails, at 4, and then Twin Creek had 8. Yeah. So it was based on size, but we did not standardize the detections like we should have. Yeah, good point.
I think.
Five Rivers collects trail data as to how popular each individual trail is. So have you thought about comparing that to the data as well as to how often each trail gets used?
Yeah, we were looking,
Closest trail.
originally we wanted to look at how active the trails were with the human detections, but I think that
So,
there was an
yeah.
issue with the way we collected the data.
We're thinking about it. We're trying to see if we can make it work with the stuff that we collected. There's definitely, we have information on the overall park, but not, it's kind of hard to make conclusion based on that because we don't know where in the park they are compared to where we put the cameras. So there's definitely more people. So it's a little tricky because Germantown has less trails, but it has more visitors. So it's like a little, we're trying to disentangle that. So TBD, it's coming. We don't have those results yet, but I definitely have that data and we've been looking at on it. So I don't know if I can make it work. Hopefully it can, but yeah, not right now. No.
With the information about people in the parks, do you have like what kind of time of day is?
Yeah,
most
so
popular?
the data at least that we could look at, it was just like how many people in like an area.
Yeah.
And at different times of day. So
Okay.
that is definitely the same across both Germantown and Twin Creek. You know, people are mostly like noon to like 3, maybe a little bit more, but you know, that's like middle of the day, yeah, kind of.
I feel like that's a surprise to me. Like, I don't know, just like people working and like, but I guess.
You would think, but yet. Yeah.
I'd love to.
You surprised by the number of species you've gotten? Do you think you should have more or less, or?
I don't know if I would say I'm necessarily surprised. I think we got over 20,000 photos that we went through and organized.
I guess a little more about the individual
Yeah.
number of different types of species.
I wasn't surprised actually. No, I wasn't surprised that deer, raccoon, and squirrel were the most.
No, he means that if you were expecting more species, I would say I was
Right,
surprised.
I think you got 9 species.
Oh,
Yeah.
oh, yes. For that, sorry, I was understanding detections, but you were saying species.
That's okay, you were hearing my New York.
Yes. I was surprised by the small amount of species that were found. I expected there to be a lot more.
Yeah, and that could be because we're so close to the trail, so that could definitely be if we put cameras far away, but I was surprised we didn't get any like foxes or skunks or any other, you know, medium-sized species. I wonder if they're like too sensitive to people and they're like really in those pockets of forest that are really like far away, and that could definitely be the case, yeah.
I'm sorry. I was just gonna say, like, do you think that the sort of small amount of diversity of the species that you guys found had anything to do with the time of year you were collecting the data?
No, I don't think so, and mostly because there's this national effort between scientists called Snapshot USA, and that is conducted every year during the fall. So all the scientists across the US conduct camera trapping between like August and November for mammals specifically, and that is the time of year that for whatever reason they determine that it's like the best time to do it. So I'm not, of all the things that I'm worried about, that's not one thing. I don't think it's because it wasn't that cold. Because it was between August and October, November, you know, it wasn't like January or February when you could definitely, you know, it's super cold. So not that, yeah.
Do you put the cameras at the same height for each place?
Mhm.
So that's one of your data points in?
Yeah.
We found that if you like do it around here on the tree, trying to make it the most straight you can, then you get the best picture of them. Because sometimes if the like deer was standing upright, you'd only get like chest down. So
Which is fine. It's really hard to put cameras for a variety of species of different sizes, right? Like if you're doing a deer study, you can afford to put them a little higher, but if you're trying to get as many things as possible, you kind of have to do it like midway. So you can get the little things, and for the deer, we didn't care if we didn't get the head, right? As long as we got like the legs, it was fine. Yeah, but it's usually a knee height.
I'm surprised you didn't get skunks.
I know. I love
I'm
that.
really
I was like,
surprised
where are
at
they?
that.
Yeah.
For the park with no trails, how did you, like obviously you can't put the camera 50 feet from a trail, so how
It
did
was
you?
just random points, yeah.
that was kind of our control site to see if trails had an influence, because there are no trails there. And we kind of put the cameras up where we would see a natural mammal path. Because sometimes you can see it in the ground or see different droppings.
So did you put it on that path or did you put it off of that path?
On the path.
On the
On the
path,
animal
okay.
path, yeah.
Makes sense.
I don't know how to say this, but I've noticed over the years, I spent a lot of time in the parks hiking and everything my whole life. So I've noticed over the years a decrease in the animals that I see on the trails. And I always wondered if it was due to population increase in the parks, or if it was the type of quiet walking versus teams of runners. Has anybody ever thought about alternating those types of activities in the parks for more nature observation and to give the animals a little bit of a break?
I guess that's more of a Metroparks
Yeah.
management question, yeah.
It's definitely something that we are considering, and what Megan will go over with her talk too is we have a trail committee that does a lot of research on the effects of trails in our parks for multiple reasons, including like wildlife and how we can impact wildlife and plants. But our trails don't really have multi-use trails besides bikeways can be used by almost anybody, and we do have separate horse trails in some of the parks, but at the moment there isn't any stipulation to be like, oh, you can't have dogs in this park or you can't have large groups or whatnot. But that would be really interesting to study, I think. I'm really curious about those questions
I wonder
too.
if people are hiking with dogs more lately, and if that could have because dogs definitely scare, even if they're on a leash, just by being there.
The things that I've noticed are mostly like the TV and like computer because they're moving fast and they're pop, 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 pop.
Yeah, like louder, yeah.
So to me that seems to frighten more animals and birds. You just don't see them anymore.
How much do you think like the difference of what animals you saw was like the geographical location of the cameras or just what the cameras were looking at?
Like, you mean like topography, like maybe more field versus up on a hill or something?
Oh, saying like maybe the habitat was different.
Yeah, that's definitely like a possibility. I think that, I think with our cameras being in sort of a diverse array of sort of ecosystems, different areas, hopefully we accounted for that to some extent. I do know that, we had some cameras where we would go through the photos and we'd have like a bunch of squirrels, for example, because there may have been a squirrel nest nearby. So sometimes it's like a little hard to tell, you never know, okay, what's gonna be living nearby.
We had a tree fall in front of one.
So this past fall with those additional 10 cameras, we had one where it was out for one day, and I don't know if you remember, we got a big wind rainstorm last October. Well, a day later, a tree fell right on that camera's view, and it just, you sort of try your best to account for that and kind of.
We try to include a variety of places like high and low and close and far away from water and stuff. But that's why we're trying to add cameras every year, because the more sites that we survey, the more we're trying to cover all different situations.
So it's a controlled random?
All the locations were as random as
Random,
realistically.
but trying to cover a diverse.
Yes.
I mean, sometimes it was really hard because you'd find a perfect spot for a camera, you put it up, and it's like, that's gonna get the best pictures, I'm gonna get so many.
And you get nothing.
And a tree falls.
Yeah, and a tree falls, and it turns out the one that has a bunch of shrubbery behind it and so crowded, has so many species.
Yeah.
So it's kind of hard to tell.
And also, before we go out for the field season, we always just, when we pick our camera spots on the GPS, we put dots around and try to get an even spread. I know this past fall when I went out and to deploy those, since we were 100 meters off the trails, I would go out and if you've ever been to Germantown or Twin Creek in some areas, they get really steep ravines, and so it's like, as much as you want to be spaced out or have an even distribution, sometimes it was a little challenging to access those ravines or
because it's like, oh, it's just 100 yards, and it's like,
so but for sure.
Right at the side of a ravine.
Yeah.
I think that's the biggest takeaway of doing any kind of field work is being flexible and trying to figure out what you can do with what you got.
Yeah. Did you guys really see many turkeys?
These 4 turkeys loved hanging out with each other. I had like 10 days of like all 4. I can't say they were the exact same species. I can't say that for a fact.
Individuals.
Or the exact same individuals, but
It was always
it was
4.
always 4 of them.
Yeah, they're definitely hanging out. They love that specific spot for some reason. Probably not where the bobcat was.
What do you make of the bobcat?
What?
What do you make of the bobcat? Does it mean anything to you, or can you say more about it, other than just, hey, there was one, there's the picture?
The only thing I can tell you is this: it was very close to previously confirmed other sightings of bobcats. So we put another camera last fall to try to catch more individuals. We didn't get any, which was very disappointing. But we're hoping that there's an area in that south corner of Germantown that doesn't really have that many trails that maybe bobcats are using, because bobcats are very sensitive to human disturbance or activity. So I think that's the little area that they're probably trying to use. But I really can't tell you much because we didn't get anything else, unfortunately.
But there definitely has been other confirmed sightings.
Yeah.
Okay, so there's more than one, there's a family, the
I hope so.
population is increasing.
I hope so.
Or just-
We get frequent sightings from like our bow hunters in the parks at Germantown and Upper Twin Conservation Area for bobcats, pretty consistently year after year. And we did have a sighting of a bobcat kitten 2 years ago at
Where?
It was at Upper Twin Conservation Area, so they're likely doing well. There's some really good quality forests in the areas and a diversity of habitats, so they've been in our parks for a while now. Twin Creek's a little bit more unknown. I'm sure there's bobcats around there as well. We just don't have as much monitoring that's done at Twin Creek.
If that's all, thank you so much for listening.
Oh, sorry. Breaks. I was just gonna say, when it comes, I see that all these photos look fairly open. When it comes to like invasive species such as bush honeysuckle or other things like that that might inhibit the traveling of a lot of these larger mammals and stuff, did you take into account some of that, like either when you were placing the cameras or when you were analyzing the data, like just the density of the understory and stuff like that? I may be getting
So we
too
didn't
nitty-gritty.
measure vegetation density, but we definitely take into account open areas, animal trails, because if you just put a camera around the spot, you're not gonna get anything. So, especially, animals are lazy, they don't wanna go through very thick vegetation, so we always try to aim for like something that you had a good view, because it could definitely have an effect, but if you just put them, you could, if we had like 15 people and 200 cameras, right? But, we just try to make what we can, but definitely open areas, openings where we saw some poop or a trail or something that indicated activity. Yeah.
Okay, so you had your random points and then you went out there and
And
kind
you
of
find
chose
specifically, yes,
the
a
type.
spot that looks
Okay.
promising for larger mammal, right?
Okay.
Not like smaller things, yeah.
And we would try our best to go through and like move twigs around or clip a little like understory things just so that we could get a good visual. And
Yeah,
then
also
once
you don't
we-
want a lot of extra movement. Well, the reason is that if you don't do that, you'll get, every time a branch moves, you'll get a photo. So it will drain all the battery and then you don't get anything. So you can't really put it in front of a plant because you're gonna get the plant and nothing else. So there's a lot of little quirks that you have to take into account.
All right, well, thank you guys for your presentation.
Thank you.